Jayla stopped for a moment and looked in the mirror. She was finishing getting ready to meet her Uber driver to head to the airport. She considered the face looking back at her. 56 years old, 3 kids, married for 32 years. She was by no means a runway model. She had her share of wrinkles and lines. After 3 children, she had developed a small tummy, but her 38D breasts were still firm. She ran her palms over her arms. Her waist was still clearly defined, and her ass, although it had gotten a little wider, was still slim and firm. She thought to herself that it could have been much worse. Finished, she tucked the last of her makeup into her suitcase and closed it tightly. The suitcase lowered to the floor on its wheels. She took one last look around and decided that everything was fine. This was the 13th time she had performed this ritual, and now it seemed to her that everything was fine-tuned and almost flawless. She smiled in anticipation of a long weekend in Charleston, California, grabbed her bag and headed for the front door. Sitting in the back seat of the sedan, she watched the Uber driver navigate the traffic leading to the airport. Her thoughts returned to her husband, Robert. He was the love of her life. She and Robert had met when he joined the investment firm where she worked as an analyst. Their romance lasted about a year and they were married. The first few years were exciting and fun. They ended up having 3 beautiful children, Robert Jr., Sarah, and Connor. The only downside she could remember was when they got married, she had to quit because of nepotism rules. Robert made a good name for himself at the firm. Eventually, he was asked to make partner, and their lives changed somewhat. As part of his partnership duties, he was assigned to manage the firm's West Coast offices. This meant that twice a year he had to visit the 8 West Coast branches. The entire trip took almost 2 weeks. The first few years were not easy. 2 of the 3 children were still in school, and Jayla didn't feel she could leave them alone for 2 weeks. She decided to stay home and let Robert travel alone. Numerous phone calls, text messages, and video calls made this easier. The first year after Connor graduated high school and went to college, she finally decided to take one of those trips with Robert. It had been an absolute disaster. She ended up spending almost every day of those 2 weeks in a hotel room, sitting in front of the TV and bored to death. The next trip Robert had planned, she refused. She explained that she would rather stay at home out of boredom than in a hotel room. He tried to convince her otherwise, but to no avail. With no children at home, she was miserable, to say the least. She decided she needed to get out of the house and find something to do. She signed up for several needlework clubs and book clubs. At least these meetings and activities helped her get out of the house. One evening at a quilting group she joined, several women around her age were discussing a quilting convention that was to be held in a few weeks in Atlanta. As they chatted, Jayla looked at her phone and realized that the convention would be held while Robert was on one of his biennial business trips. 3 or 4 women were planning to come to Atlanta for the weekend. She asked if she would be welcome. All were happy to invite her, and they sat around for several more hours discussing travel arrangements. The Uber driver dropped her off at the check-in door at the airport. She already had her boarding pass in her phone and showed it to the clerk at the gate. The bag was left as carry-on luggage and directed to the appropriate gate to wait. After going through security and having a cup of coffee, she settled into a chair by the exit and waited. Her thoughts went back to that trip to Atlanta. That had been fun. She wasn't much of a quilter. As it turned out, neither did the other 4 women who had gone with her. True, they went to seminars and demonstrations during the day. Jayla soon learned that the real reason for the trip was to go to a different restaurant each night, and then to visit famous entertainment venues. Memories of that first evening in Atlanta are still vivid in her mind. After the last seminar, everyone hurried back to their hotel rooms to get ready. Jayla had done the same. They agreed to meet in the lobby in an hour. Jayla ran a brush through her hair, applied her makeup, and decided that the slacks and button-down blouse she'd worn that day would be appropriate for going out to dinner and experiencing Atlanta's famous nightlife. Once in the lobby, she was surprised. The other four women were completely different. They were all wearing cocktail dresses and had completely changed their makeup. Jayla looked at them in embarrassment and explained that she had not intended to go to such an event. The other women laughed and said it would be fine. Next time she would know. They went outside, caught a cab, and hit the road. They had dinner at one of Atlanta's finest establishments. Everything was very good, but a little pricey. After the restaurant, they caught another cab and headed to the East Side Entertainment District. Jayla had no idea where they were going, but she was okay with it. It was interesting going alone and with a bunch of women who obviously knew what they were doing. They were headed to a nightclub in downtown Atlanta. The other women were talking about it and seemed to be excited about it. Jayla learned that the club had no less than 5 levels, 3 dance floors with DJs and private entertainment areas for corporations and small groups. It sounded intriguing and exotic. As soon as they arrived, Jayla found the whole place almost overwhelming. The place was noisy, bustling, and most places were crowded with people who were at least 15 years younger than her. Eventually, she found a small corner to one side of the dance floor and stood, sipping her drink. The others immediately disappeared into the crowd. Jayla noticed that soon all 4 were dancing, some with multiple partners at once. Apparently, that was not uncommon. She had been watching for almost an hour when she noticed a man approaching her. He was pleasant-looking, nothing unusual, but not dressed as fashionably as most of the others. He was also older than most of the other men in the club. As he approached her, he smiled. "I don't mean to intrude, but you look a little out of place." She nodded. "I feel that way too. I guess I just don't fit in." "Nonsense. Have you looked around the rest of the place yet?" "Number, I got my drink and found this place. All my friends are on the dance floor." "My name is Charlie. Charles Elliott. I'm here for a conference at a hotel downtown. Let's wander around and see the place." "I don't want to. I'm married, and I'm here for the conference too. Maybe I should stay where my friends are." He looked around. "Do you see any of them?" Jayla looked around the crowd and looked where she had seen the others just a few minutes ago. They seemed to have disappeared. "Number, they don't seem to be here. I don't think they're worried about you. Come on. This techno music is giving me a headache. There's a little lounge upstairs that's much quieter and plays great jazz." Jayla looked at him. He seemed pleasant. She didn't get any bad vibes from him and decided to take him up on his offer. He led her through the club and up a few flights of stairs. There they found themselves in a more relaxed atmosphere. It was almost intimate. A 3-man jazz band was playing at the far end of the room. He found a table about halfway between the door and the stage and sat her down politely. "What are you drinking?" She looked at her empty glass. "Oh, mine's just right. I don't need another." "Good. No problem. But I'd like one, if you'll excuse me." She watched him walk toward the bar. Mentally, she compared Charles to Robert. They were about the same age. Charles was not as tall as Robert, and more slender. She noticed that he also wore a wedding ring. When he returned, he smiled and sat down at the table with a fresh drink. "Tell me about this convention." She smiled embarrassedly. "It's a quilting convention. Lots of women in one room learning all the latest quilting and applique techniques. I'm afraid it's not very interesting. Are you?" He grinned. "Not much different from yours, I guess. A bunch of men sitting in a room listening to more men talk about the coming changes in the electronics industry. I work as a salesman for a distributor. I'm not an engineer, but I need to be able to talk like one, so I come to these events to learn enough to seem smart." For the next 2 hours, they just chatted. Both talked about their children, spouses, and life in general. Jayla learned that Charles had been married almost as long as she had, to a woman who Jayla said was the love of his life. They even showed each other pictures of their spouses and children. The 2 hours flew by quickly. Jayla looked at her phone and was surprised to find that it was almost midnight. "It's been fun, but I really need to get back to the hotel. I think I'm going to need a cab or an Uber because I have no idea where I am." I need to go too. Why don't we take a cab? I don't think my hotel is far from yours. She agreed, and they headed toward the front door of the club. He hailed a cab, gave the driver the name of his hotel, and Jayla did the same. They made themselves comfortable. The ride to the hotel was pleasant. They each gave each other their contact information. Jayla didn't know why she had agreed to this. Jayla heard the flight attendant call her number to board her flight. She gathered her bag and hand luggage and got in line to board the plane. It wasn't long before she was comfortably seated in her first-class seat. She waited for the other passengers to board. She looked out the window to see the crew loading luggage and continued to reminisce. During the quilting workshop, her phone rang. As she remembered, it wasn't hard to distract her because the workshop was quite boring and on a topic she wasn't interested in. Lowering her gaze to the phone, she saw a message from Charles. Plans? She hesitated. She really didn't have any plans. But setting up a date with a man she'd known for less than a day while out of town without her husband was somehow wrong. It just didn't seem right. She decided to hedge her bets. I'm not sure. I need to talk to the others. His reply took only a few seconds. Let me know. It's my last night in town. Why don't we have dinner? She hesitated again. I'll be in touch. After the seminar, there was a happy hour to wrap up the conference. She and the others stayed for appetizers. She asked the two women she'd come with about their plans. She learned that they usually spent their last evening alone. It wasn't explicitly stated, but Jayla got the impression that the two of them already had plans. She left that question unanswered. She remembered the internal argument she was having with herself. She knew that most evenings on Robert's trips were filled with dinners out, after-dinner drinks, and the occasional trip to the club. He never hid it from her. And there had been a few occasions when he had told during their late-night phone conversations about the places they went to, and sometimes about dancing with one of the female employees at the local office. It always seemed innocent and casual, and he talked about it openly. She also remembered that she didn't like having dinner alone and then going to bed early in a hotel room, especially when she knew the other women were going out partying in town. With some apprehension, she pulled her cell phone out of her purse and looked at the message. She quickly typed a reply and then paused, hesitating before hitting send. There's nothing going on here. What do you suggest? It took a few minutes for the answer to come through. The others were eager to get on with the evening, and soon the whole crowd was heading for the elevators. She was sitting in a crowded train car with 4 other women when her phone rang. She read the message carefully. Something simple. I'm not late. I have an early flight. She quickly dialed the number. Where to? I'll take a cab and pick you up at the hotel, 6 o'clock at night. Wear something nice. She put the phone back in her purse. One of the 4 women she was with nudged her and leaned toward her with a conspiratorial smile. The last night of the conference is always the best. Remember that what happened 150 miles from home stays there. Jayla looked at her in surprise and saw her wink at her. The elevator door opened and everyone headed to their rooms. A flight attendant came over and took the drink order. Jayla chose a nice white wine. As the stewardess drove off, she was immersed in memories. She recalled that night in great detail. Despite the years that had passed, it was firmly imprinted in her memory. She really didn't have anything beautiful to wear. She was going away for the weekend to attend a conference and do some needlework. In the end, a knee-length blue straight skirt and a soft, dark cashmere sweater was the best she could wear. She got dressed, did her hair and makeup. At 6:30, she was in the lobby. As she stepped outside, she remembered how hot and stuffy it was in Atlanta. The wait wasn't long. The cab pulled up to the portico and a smiling Charles got out. He was dressed in an impeccable business suit, complete with tie. He bent at the waist and waved his hand toward the open door of the cab. Your chariot awaits. Remembering that moment, she smiled softly. At that moment, she giggled like a schoolgirl. She got into the cab and they touched off on their journey. The trip wasn't a long one. He chose a restaurant at the top of one of Atlanta's finest hotels, with a view of Atlanta and five-star cuisine. Jayla remembered feeling a little underdressed for the place. The dinner had gone great. The conversation was almost intimate. They talked at length about their spouses and children. Charles asked about Robert, and she told him quite a bit about their courtship and marriage. Jayla remembered that he asked her if she was happy, and she enthusiastically replied that she was as happy as she thought she could be at all. Jayla also recalled that Charles had said the same thing about his wife and family. After dinner, he suggested that they go up to the bar. The bar still had the same wonderful view of Atlanta, and as the city went from daylight to darkness, it became even more fantastic. As the lights began to flicker all over the city and the darkness grew deeper. As they sat and talked, classic rock was playing on the far side of the nightclub. She remembered Charles watching the band as they started a new song. She stopped to listen and recognized Eric Clapton singing "Wonderful Tonight." It was one of her favorite songs. Charles stood up and held out his hand to her. She looked at him incredulously. "Come on. I love Clapton and especially this song." "I don't. I'm married. It seems a little weird to me." He looked at her sympathetically. "I understand. If it's a problem, we won't. I don't know much about your husband, but from what you've told me about your relationship, if you told him you go to a few dances, he'd probably ask if your partner is a good dancer." Jayla grinned. That's probably exactly what he would have said. She took Charles's hand, and they stepped out onto the dance floor just in time to enjoy the last half of the song. They danced a few more times and had a few more drinks. It was getting late when Charles looked up at her. "Jayla, this is one of the best nights of my entire trip. I usually sit in a hotel room and eat the food that is brought to the room. You made this night so enjoyable. One more dance before we leave?" She remembered looking at him and wondering what would have happened if she had met him before she met Robert all those years ago. She took his hand and they walked toward the dance floor. He stopped by the small stage and spoke quietly to the guitarist. Jayla saw him hold out his hand. The guitarist turned to the others and then looked at them with a smile. The first chords of the song began to play, and the black bassist stepped up to the microphone and began to sing in a deep baritonal voice. She recognized the song, "Nothing Takes the Place of Love" by Isaac Hayes. When the baritonal voice boomed behind them, Charles put his arms around her and pulled her against his chest. She rested her head on his shoulder. It was magical. They were alone on the dance floor. The music, her thoughts. The song seemed to go on for an hour, but it only lasted about 4 minutes. When the song ended, they stood for another minute, pressed against each other. Finally, Charles pulled away. "We should get back to the hotel. I have an early flight." She nodded. Then the band started another song. It was another Isaac Hayes tune, "For the Good Times." She heard the first few bars and then the words. He looked at her with his gray eyes. Without saying a word, he pulled her to him again. They barely moved to the beat of the music. She closed her eyes. The ride back to the hotel passed in silence and without words. They sat close together, each immersed in their own thoughts. When the cab stopped in front of the hotel, he got out of the car to hold the door for her. She began to squirm in the seat. When she turned to get up, something inside her snapped. She had spent the last 5 years thinking about that moment, about what made her act the way she did and where it led. She remembered reaching out to take his hand and pull him back into the cockpit. She spent the rest of the flight reminiscing, trying to figure out how that instant decision had affected her. The night had been magical. Charles was a slow and intense lover. He was neither rough nor gentle. She returned to the hotel early the next morning. He put her in a cab and got into another to go to the airport. She showered, put on her traveling clothes, and packed her bags. The cab took her to the airport, and she was already there when the other 4 women arrived. They wanted to know where she was and what she was doing. She explained that she had gone for a quiet dinner, went back to the hotel, got up early, and arrived at the airport. They all seemed disappointed that she hadn't told them about her affair. Jayla listened as each of them told the others about their antics on Saturday night. Robert returned the following Friday, and she picked him up from the airport. He greeted her at the airport with a long and passionate kiss, to which she responded with an equally ardent kiss. Life was back to normal. Although she occasionally thought back to that Saturday night, she didn't try to relive it again. It had happened. It had been magical. It had been done. 6 months later, Robert was planning his next 2-week trip to the West Coast. He invited her to come with him. She was seriously contemplating the offer when she suddenly received a text message. It was Charles. "It may be presumptuous, but I'll be at a company retreat. It ends Friday night. Any chance Robert will be away on one of his trips and we can have dinner?" That got her thinking. She thought about it for days. She finally told Robert that she just didn't like sitting in a hotel while he was busy in meetings. He was adamant. She would love to meet everyone at dinners and social events. She could come and attend their meetings. She didn't have to spend time in a hotel room. She could go shopping or sightseeing. He made a really convincing argument. She almost gave in. Then Charles sent a second message. "The conference ends on Friday, but I will stay until Sunday. That way we can spend all day Saturday and Saturday evening together." She found Robert in his office. Sneaking up behind him, she ran her hands over his chest and kissed his cheek. "Husband, I love you to bits, but the thought of spending so much time with coworkers listening to you rant about finances and investments and all that's wrong with our country doesn't seem pleasant. I'll stay home and mind my own business with my groups. I'll be fine." He looked up at her. He was smiling, but he looked a little disappointed. "If that's what you really want, I want you to know that I would love for you to join me." She kissed him again, and they made incredible love that night. She remembered it clearly, even after all this time. Jayla remembered that second weekend well. She had booked a room at the same hotel where he was staying. As soon as his conference was over, they had gone out for dinner, drinks and dancing, and then back to his room. The second night in his arms and in his bed was almost as wonderful as the first. Surprisingly, on Saturday they spent the entire day in the room. Mostly they sat and talked. Only in the evening did they move on to intimacy. Dinner was served in the room, and they spent the rest of the evening lying in bed, naked, talking, laughing, and watching old movies on cable. Sunday morning she stayed close by while he got ready to leave. When he left, she went to her room, packed her things, and went to get her car to drive home. She returned well before Robert's flight, late in the afternoon, and had his favorite dinner ready for him by the time he arrived. She felt the plane's landing gear touch the runway and looked out. She was back in Atlanta, where it all began 6 years ago. This was her 13th trip to see Charles. The closer the plane got to the terminal, the less she thought about home and Robert, and the more she thought about the next 2 days and 3 nights with Charles. The cab ride to the hotel was longer than usual. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when she finally reached the lobby and picked up her room key. She suspected Charles was still in a meeting, so she headed to her room. There she unpacked a few things that needed to be hung on the coat rack. She was restless after the flight, so she went down the stairs to the lobby to walk around a bit. She was looking in one of the store windows when someone's arm went around her waist and she heard a voice. "Hi, Jayla." Turning around, she looked into his gray eyes and almost melted. Her arms wrapped around his neck and her lips found his lips. The kiss was enough to attract several stares and well-meaning comments. Finally, she released herself from his embrace. "You ended early." Yes, it ended early, and everyone was anxious to leave the meeting room as soon as possible. Some are busy now, trying to bargain their way onto late flights to get home. She looked up at him. "What are the plans for tonight?" "Dinner, drinks, and some dancing. Then we'll have the whole day and 2 nights to do whatever we want." She grinned, lifted up on tiptoe, and kissed him. "Then I need to shower and get dressed." "Lead the way, princess." They reached her hotel room. He kissed her and then pulled away for a few moments. I really need to pick up my packets from the meeting, at least change my shirt and call home. Is that okay with you? Sure. I'll shower and get dressed, but take your time. Come back when you're ready. He nodded, kissed her forehead, and left for his room. She closed the door and began to quickly undress, getting ready to shower. She took a long, leisurely shower. Once out of the shower, she started on her hair and then her makeup. Tonight, she decided to wear her new jade green dress. She walked out of the bathroom to finish getting dressed. Sitting down on the bed, she glanced at her purse that was lying on the bed. She pulled out her hotel key and tossed it on the bed. The purse opened and most of its contents scattered across the bed. Only then did she notice that her cell phone was still in airplane mode. She hadn't switched it after the plane landed. Sitting up on the bed, she reached for her phone and pressed the button to return it to full mode. At that moment, the phone rang. She looked up and saw that she'd gotten 8 calls and as many text messages. She checked the missed calls and saw that about half of them were from her daughter and half were from her son. She immediately dialed her daughter's number. Jayla heard Sarah's voice, and there was a harsh note in it that Jayla didn't like. Mom, where are you? Why aren't you answering your phone? I'm sorry, I forgot to put it on the charger last night. Line number 1. Did something happen? Mom, Dad had a massive heart attack at a meeting this morning. The doctor sent him into surgery right after he got to the hospital. The surgery is still going on. Where have you been? Daddy needs you, now! Jayla sat there in complete shock. Mom! Mom, are you here? I'm flying to Sacramento first thing in the morning. Robert is going tonight. He should be there in a couple of hours. I talked to Connor in Germany not too long ago. He's trying to get an emergency leave to come home. You need to get to Sacramento as soon as possible. Mom, can you hear me? Jayla finally found her voice. Yes, I understand. I'll start making arrangements right now. I'll be there as soon as I can. Good. And don't let your phone go dead again. When you get to the airport, get one of those extended battery thingies. Yeah? Sure. I need to get out and start booking tickets. Have Robert contact me when he gets here. I will. He's been calling you too. Okay. Bye. Jayla dropped the phone in her lap. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to pull herself together and decide what to do. At that moment, she heard a knock on the door. Numbly, she stood up. The phone fell to the floor. Stumbling, she walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw Charles standing there. Swinging the door open, she ran out into the hallway. He looked at her in surprise as she ran out of the room and grabbed him by the shoulders, sobbing. What the hell happened? He led her into the room and slammed the door shut with his foot. She was sobbing almost uncontrollably. It took me almost 5 minutes to calm her down enough for her to start talking. Finally, he realized what had happened. He sat her down on the bed and picked up the phone. Where is he? She sobbed and said, In Sacramento. Anyone with him? A few of his businessman friends. My son will be there in a couple hours. I need to get there, but I just can't think. You don't have to. Get dressed. Get dressed for the trip, now! His tone startled her and she jumped slightly. She looked up at him in surprise and he leaned over and kissed her forehead. Didn't mean to startle you, but at least I got your attention. Get dressed and pack your things. Why? Because you're going to Sacramento. You need to be with your husband. She nodded and went in search of clothes. Charles sat on the bed and pulled out his cell phone. He was busy until he heard her closing her suitcase and zipping it up. He looked up. You're booked on a flight to Sacramento. It has a connection in Dallas, but you won't have to change planes. By the time you get there, it'll be too late. Do you have cash? She nodded. I have $40. He pulled out his wallet and handed her a thick wad of 20s. Here, that'll be enough for you until you get settled in Sacramento. You'll need something to eat before you board the plane. She looked at him incredulously. I don't know what to say. I'll pay you back. I promise. Someday. Nonsense. You don't have to worry about anything but getting to the hospital and being with Robert. He's going to need you more than ever. She wrapped her arms around him and hugged him tightly. Her tears flowed again. Are you sure? Jayla, I hope you'll do the same for me if we switch places. Now grab your bag and let's get you to the airport. He managed to find a flight leaving in less than 2 hours. They hurried to the airport and he reached the line for the quality control desk. He pulled her to him and hugged her tightly. She began to kiss him. He smiled and ran his hand over her lips. Save these for Robert. They will mean more to him now than ever. I'll be in touch. He turned her toward the TSA booth. When she finally checked in, she searched for him with her eyes, but he was gone.